Thank you for spending some time with me to talk about the new Denon receivers. So my name is Phil Jones, and if you have not met me before, I am the Director of Training for Sound United. We are introducing 4 new receivers as part of our 2020 X-Series lineup. So let's quickly talk about the 4 models that we are going to be introducing. We are going to be introducing a 2700, a 3700, a 4700, and a 6700. And these are the new 2020 X-Series receivers to replace the models above $1,600. Now the 8500 will continue in the lineup. It will be getting some improvements via either firmware updates or optional board upgrades, and we will talk about those upgrades as we go along. You'll notice that all of them are support 8K 60 and 4K 120. Denon is the first manufacturer to launch receivers that support HDMI 2.1 and 8K. It's another example of Denon being the leader in the industry. There's all these cool features. If I had told you just this year that we were adding all of these cool new things that were found out of 2019 models under 1600 US, people would have been great. Here's my money. But as every good American salesperson says, wait, there's more. DTSX Pro is going to be introduced on our 6700 and it will be available via an upgrade on our X8500. I'm sorry, we haven't even talked about video yet, and that should be enough for you to want one of these receivers. I'm sure that many of you are saying, wow, that's pretty cool. I really want that 6700 just because of, wow, the Bluetooth headphones and the simulcasting and the dual speaker presets and the DTSX Pro, all this stuff, it's amazing. And guess what? We haven't even talked about this 8K stuff yet. Now, I did 2.5 hours on 8K, so we're not going to go through all that today. If you want to see that, anything you would ever want to know in deep detail about chroma, subsampling, bandwidth, cables, what's in a cable, how do you test a cable, all that stuff is available on our Sign Edit YouTube channel. That's why I want to do it early so I can help you guys have a foundation so we wouldn't have to spend hours and hours and hours talking about it when the receivers launched. But I do want to cover a few points about HDMI 2.1 that are unique, that are cool, because these are the first receivers that support 8K and HDMI 2.1. So we had to have a new standard, and there was a couple of reasons. They want to make a better video, better audio, the best gaming, and the best user experience. Most of these things, from the audio side, the gaming side, and the user experience side, could have been done using the old standard. They could have added that type of stuff to HDMI 2.0B. The problem was the video. In order to do the video, you needed more bandwidth. We've discussed prior in previous sessions that there's 5 different parts of video, and the two that make them the two that they're improving when it comes to HDMI 2.1 is the resolution. We're going from 8K to 4K. Think about going from an 8 megapixel photograph to a 13 megapixel photograph. The file is going to be bigger. So each frame is sharper and has more detail. It makes a bigger video file. And instead of showing you 60 frames per second, I'm showing you 120 frames per second, which means the file is going to be bigger. And these things will be supported by the upcoming game systems that are coming out. In 8K 60 and 4K 120 will be supported by the PlayStation 5 as well as the new Xbox that's coming. And we've learned that gamers are more interested in the higher frame rates because it makes objects that are in motion look a lot sharper. So if I'm playing a first-person shooter or I'm playing a sporting game, being able for that ball or that person running down the street to be a lot sharper, it really does give you an advantage. Now, in order to do that 8K 60 or that 4K 120, you need to send more data down the HDMI cable. So before, HDMI cables were high-speed cables. Now HDMI 2.1 cables are ultra high-speed cables. There's going to be issues with cables. Please watch the session on YouTube if you haven't seen it or you didn't attend on HDMI bandwidth and long-distance cables, because there's some problems with cables that will have to be addressed, but all that stuff we explain in detail there. I will just cover some things briefly. So now I have this 48. Now we keep hearing this 48, 48, 48. And if you're into video like I am, you'll notice that that LG got yelled at because their TV can only support 40 gigabits per second. And people were saying, "Oh my God, what are they doing? Oh gosh, what are they doing? I can't believe that they're only doing 40." So some things we need to explain. All consumer TVs, OLEDs, LCDs, and 99.99% of computer monitors that are available to consumers, I have yet to find one, by the way, that is not, are all 10-bit, use 10-bit panels, because there's only a few manufacturers that make the panels. Now, 10-bit panels give you a billion colors. It's a lot of colors. And if I want to use 4K at 120 frames per second on a and with 10-bit color, which give you all the color that panel can give you, and 444 just means I sample each color, red, green, and blue every single time. So 4K resolution, 120 frames per second, a billion colors, because the TV can do a billion colors, and each color is sampled every single time. That will give you a maximum of 40. 20. Most of us are movie people. I'm more of a movie person than a game person. Movie people watch movies in 24p not because they have to, but because they like it. So 24p is probably going to be if any kind of movie content that comes out. Well, 8K at 24p at 10-bit, all the color this a TV can do, and every color sampled every single time, the number is, lo and behold, 40. If I go to 8K 60, and I give you a billion colors, there is no standard in HDMI 2.1 to sample every single color every single time. Well, the maximum there is 40. It's the maximum that you're going to get uncompressed. Now, they go, well, what about my game system? Won't I need 40 for my game system? Most game systems, gaming consoles, and even good graphics cards are using off-the-shelf HDMI circuitry, 2.1 circuitry. And those boards can only support output 40 gigabits per second. 4 channels down to 4 video channels go down the HDMI cable at 10 gigabits per channel. If you want to understand what that is, check out our bandwidth webinar. So basically what's happening is the most you're going to get from your game system is 40. So TV, 40 is going to give you everything that any consumer TV projector, computer monitor can provide. The game systems that everybody's hyped on can only output a maximum of 40. So I could turn up the 12-bit color or something crazy, but I can't do the higher frame rates because I can only do 40. So 40 for the TV, 40 for the game system. So you still got to make sure that all of your cables can support 40. Many of them can't even support 18. So what do? So what we're going to do is, just like on all of our receivers, we've always had an HDMI diagnostics tool. The old HDMI diagnostics tool would measure, could measure your cables up to 18 gigabits per second, which was enough for 4K at 60 frames per second HDR. The new receivers we're introducing today will have a HDMI diagnostic tool that can support up to 8K, and it can measure bandwidths up to 40, which is the maximum that the game systems and the sources can output, and the maximum that the TV can utilize based on its 10-bit panel. So you'll be able to check to make sure your cables can provide that 40 gigabits per second. Now, another thing I want to point out about that is that if you wanted a device that is a test pattern generator or analyzer to test that, the other option is an Iridio 7G. I have one. It costs $5,000. So if you wanted to test your cables, you can buy a outboard test pattern analyzer generator for $5,000, or you can buy a Denon X2700, which retails for $849 US. So that shows how advanced our video capabilities are and how state-of-the-art our products are, that we can do testing that you would have to spend several $1,000s to do any other way, which I think is really, really cool. So now we talk a lot about 2.1, and we always talking about 8K and 40 gigabits this and 48 gigabits that and 120 frames. But a lot of customers, let's be honest, are not going to buy these, are not buying 8K TVs this year. While the manufacturers are really promoting these, the majority of their television sets that are available this year and for the next few years are not going to be 8K displays. Maybe 3 of the 60 models they sell. But there are lots of features that are part of HDMI 2.1 that have nothing to do with 8K or ultra high frame rates like 120 frames per second. Now, there's ones that enhance gaming, variable refresh rate, quick frame transport, and auto low latency mode are 3 examples of gaming. If you want to learn about these, we have a whole HDMI webinar on called Utilizing HDMI with New and Existing Devices, and we cover these technologies in detail. If you're a movie buff, you're going to get things such as dynamic HDR, quick media switching, and enhanced audio return channel. Now, and we cover these in detail have covered these in detail in prior webinars as well. That I do want to tackle or talk real quickly about eARC again. So ARC and eARC can support the Dolby and surround, all the Dolby and DTS surround formats. So they can even support Dolby Atmos and DTSX and DTSX Pro. So ARC can do those as well. The difference between ARC and eARC is ARC is compressed multi-channel / object-based, and eARC is uncompressed multi-channel / object-based. So the best way to think of it, if I have a CD and a high-res music file, they both are 2-channel or 5-channel. If I want to do, actually, most CDs are 2-channel, and I can have a high-res file that's 2-channel. They're still the same amount of channels, except for one is compressed and one is not. So if I use eARC, I can get great surround sound from it, but each of the objects and each of the channels is compressed in ARC, and they're uncompressed in eARC. Now, this is important when people say, well, what about when we talk about receivers? Because I could take, say, a game system and I plug it into the TV because I want the game system to be close to the TV. I need to feed the audio from the TV to the AVR. And if I use ARC, or it will be in surround, if I use eARC, it'll give me the maximum if whatever that music system, whatever sound could come out of that game system, I will get. Also, I will have the ability to, of course, I can have one thing plugged into the TV and one thing plugged into the receiver as well. Now, for many of you, including myself, ARC is probably going to be the way. eARC is probably going to be will keep me from buying a new receiver for a while, or even upgrading the HDMI board on my preprocessor for a while, because even if I get a 8K TV and a game system, I will probably plug the game system into the TV and feed the audio from the TV to my receiver via eARC. So there'll be no rush for me to buy another upgrade my receiver. It will happen when there's an 8K projector, because now I have to send the sound. I would plug the game system into the receiver and send the video to the TV, 8K TV, and video to the 8K projector. But there are no 8K projectors that have been announced. So there is no rush for me to do that when I can just utilize eARC to send the audio from my TV back to my receiver. I also mentioned that I have a Sony TV, and that Sony TV has the Tidal app that will offers music in Dolby Atmos. And the way I get that back to my AV8805 is via ARC or eARC. So right now, that stuff is being played back in Dolby Digital Plus, so ARC is enough. But if they decide they want to crank it up to Dolby 2 HD, the receiver, my AV8805 and older Denons and new receivers will also support eARC, so I will get the higher quality audio. Another thing that separates ARC from eARC is lip sync correction is optional. eARC lip sync correction is mandatory. So a lot of people were taking devices and plugging them into their Samsung TV. I mean, their LG OLED, and then when they were trying to feed it back to a receiver, they were getting lip sync issues. When they switched, those new LG TVs, OLEDs, support eARC, and so do our receivers. So if you use an HDMI cable with Ethernet and you have the LG set to eARC, the receiver and the TV will perform auto lip sync correction and lip sync problems go away. Let's look at the back of this guy. So this is the back of the 6700. Lots of insies and outsies. So the other thing I want to point out is the HDMI outputs. So as you move up the lineup, you go up to a total on the 47 or 67 of 8 HDMI ins, 3 HDMI outs. One of the HDMI inputs is rated for 8K 60, 4K 120. One of them. Both the monitor outs are rated for 8K 60, 4K 120. Of the 8 inputs, one of those HDMI inputs are on the front. So there's 7 on the back, 1 on the front, and one of the inputs on the back is labeled 8K because it can support 8K 60 or 4K 120. The other inputs, the other 7 inputs that are not 8K inputs on the 47 and 6700 still support all of the cool HDMI 2.1 features. Dynamic HDR, Dolby Vision, HLG, HDR10, variable refresh rate, quick media switching, quick frame transport, and auto low latency mode. And what they'll do is you can also upscale any of those 7 inputs from HD or 4K all the way up to 8K using the new scaler that is built into the receiver. Now, we mentioned there was all these different additional features besides resolution, dynamic HDR, HDR10, VRR. So how do you know what is being sent from your source to your TV? You can go out if you want to test that and buy a Neridio 7G for $5,000 US. Or we realize that when you have a receiver, it's called a repeater. It's between the source and the display. So it understands the capabilities of both devices. So what we can do is if you hit the info menu, it will tell you all the information about the video signal. HDR, is it in HDR? What type of HDR? Dynamic HDR, Dolby Vision, HOG, HDR10 plus, what? It'll tell you the resolution. Whether that resolution is variable, whether it's 8K, eARC, all the different features, it will tell you. So not only can you test your cables and your cabling using a Denon receiver via HDMI Diagnostics mode, you can verify functionality between your devices, your source and your display. Because a lot of times people blame the black box, the receiver, when there isn't a problem, and the receiver can say, oh, no, I'm not seeing VRR. That's not me. So that tells you that something wrong, a setting is off on your TV or a setting is off on your display, on your source. So we help you troubleshoot your issues so you don't blame our receivers. This is the back of the receivers to show you what the HDMIs look like. As I said, there's 1 in and 2 outs. Now you'll notice that it says HDCP 2.3. That is the newest version of HDCP copyright protection. Whenever there's new content or there's a bump in resolution, they come up with a new copyright protection. They're 1.4 for HD, 2.2 for 4K HDR, and 2.3 for 8K. The nice thing is it's backwards compatible. All it's for is if I have a 8K source, HDCP 2.3, and I have an 8K TV, HDCP 2.3, we will pass it. If I take a 8K source, a Blu-ray player, and I put it back there, or a game system, and that game system is 2.3. The receiver's 2.3, but if your TV's 2.2, only thing that's going to happen is the player, your game system, will send it 2.2 content, and that is 4K at 4K HDR. Because if it's a 4K TV, it can't use the 8K material anyway. So I'm going to send you the stuff that it can do, which is under 2.2. So it's backwards compatible. Now, a lot of times, if we go into a receiver, you may end up with older devices. So say I have an older Blu-ray player, and I have all these new devices. Like say I have an old Blu-ray player from 6 years ago in my rack, along with all this new stuff. Before, we had the ability to change or reassign HDCP inside of the HDMI diagnostics mode. You have to hit some fancy button pushes. Now I can go into the receiver, and if I have a problem with something, I can limit it. The reason why this was set to 1.4 is because I was trying to send it through my switcher. If you ever plug in an old DVD player or an old Blu-ray player or an old cable box and you're having problems, you can go in here and limit HDCP if you have problems. A couple last simple things. The remote now has an 8K button on it. Go figure, because one input is 8K and you need to know which one that is. And finally, we will be doing the upgrades for the 8500 and the AV8805. We'll be getting the upgrade to HDMI 2.1. That will be available by the end of the year. That is a board replacement. Well, we will send it into your service center. In the US, we will send it to our service center in upstate New York. When we start doing these upgrades at the end of the year for the current 8500s and 8805s, we will also start putting that same upgraded board in the units coming off the assembly line at the factory. So right now, your receiver is an X8500H. The new one will be an X8500HA. And the AV8805 will be an AV8805A. So basically, you can upgrade the one you have when you decide you want to do it, and everything that comes off the factory later in the year will already have the HDMI board built in. We have done these upgrades before on our flagship pieces, so we know how to do it. So it's coming soon. Most of us may wait, including me. I probably will wait on the board, but because right now I don't have anything to utilize it with, eARC and auto latency mode is enough for me. But if I get an 8K TV or an 8K projector, then I will be motivated to do the board swap. So thank you very much for coming. But anybody that would like to hang out and ask questions for a little while, I am more than willing to do so for a few more minutes. So let's do some Q&A.
Osman, he says one HDMI 2.1 input is not enough if I plan to buy a PS5 and an Xbox Series X, and then just a number 300, 138.
Mm-hmm.
He or she would like to know, can a new 8K TV work with previous Denon receivers, and
Yes.
how would that work? And I think you can answer both of those Qs with 1A.
I am actually going to probably have an Xbox and a PlayStation for testing. The only reason I can think of right now to plug the game system into the receiver itself is if I want to feed 8K to a projector. And projectors that are 8K do not exist. If I plug that Xbox One X and that 5K and that brand new PlayStation 5 into that TV, I could send that signal to a 2018, 2019, and 2020 Denon receiver via eARC. So I can continue to utilize my beautiful receiver for a while. The only time you're going to really need that input is if you have a projector and you run out of inputs on your TV.
Can you talk just a little bit about 8K and cables?
Okay, so when it comes right now, the cables that you buy are high-speed cables, which means they can support up to 18 gigabits per second. Now, a lot of those copper cables that are just made out of copper, when you start getting past they start to fail around 16 feet, about 4 meters. After that, they have to get thicker and thicker and thicker to pass that signal. Now, you got to remember that now you're going from, if they're failing at 4 or 5 meters at 18 gigabits per second, now you're trying to shove at least 40 down the line, which is 3 times the amount of power or the amount of information. So what ends up happening is most copper cables, copper non-active cables, will probably be good for about 6 feet. After that, 6 to 9 feet, after that, you're going to have to go to an active HDMI cable or a active copper HDMI cable or an optical cable. The way that you can tell that a cable is active, by the way, is if you've ever bought a cable and on the ends one said source and one said display. A lot of times, or a cable that's HDMI that is one way. A lot of times those one-way cables, there's a little amplifier in the end that plugs into the display that powers the cable. So you're going to start seeing a lot more active copper cables for distances up to about 5 meters. And then after that, it's going to have to be optical cables to pass the higher quality signal. That is another benefit of eARC, because if I use eARC, the cable I have is perfectly fine, long as it's HDMI with Ethernet. So I get a little 2-meter cable to plug the game system into the TV, and then I run the regular cable you already have that's, I don't know, 4 meters or 5 meters from the TV back to the receiver. And then all of my old sources are connected to that as well, and I'm good to go. If I decide I want to plug that game system into that TV, into that receiver, I got to have a really good cable from the game system to the receiver, and an extremely expensive cable that's going to cost $500, $400 US to go from that receiver to a TV if that TV is on the other side of the room. Or I can just plug both of those game systems into the TV and use the old cables I already have to send a signal from the TV, the audio from the TV to the receiver. So one of the reasons why people are going to use eARC is because, and plug everything into the TV for 8K, is because it's going to be cheaper when it comes to accessories to do it that way. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, and hopefully you will find more interesting information there. I'm committed to doing shorter things. There'll be a lot more 5-10 minute things on there. In conclusion, tons of cool features. So better audio experience, better movie experience, gaming experience, better user experience, IMAX Enhanced, DTS:X Pro, dual speaker preset, preamp mode, ruined capabilities. Oh, and by the way, we are also the world's first receivers that can support HDMI 2.1 and 8K. So there's plenty of reasons to buy a Denon X-Series receiver, even if you do not care about 8K.